Hi there, and welcome once again to Unstoppable Mindset. And we have a, I think, a really interesting show today, an interesting episode. We get to chat with Major Retired Chase Spears. I've been saying Rhett all morning because he's got Rhett in parentheses, and I didn't even think about it being not a name but retired. But anyway, that's me. Anyway, he has been involved in a lot of writing in and out of the military. He was a military person for 20 years. He's now in a doctoral candidacy program. And my gosh, there's a lot there, but we'll get to it also. Major Rhett, Major Chase Spears, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Just thrilled to be with you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Now that we've abused you with Rhett, but that's okay.
I've been called worse.
Well, there you are, and by your friend, I bet. So that's what really makes it more fun.
Exactly.
But I really am grateful that you were willing to come on and spend some time with us. Why don't we start? I love to start this way to give people a chance to get to know you. Why don't you tell us some about the early Chase Spears and growing up and all that stuff?
Well, it's been quite a journey. I grew up in the Southeast U.S. My family was out of Florida, and when I was a teenager, we ended up moving. We went out to Texas, which was really just kind of an entire change of culture for us. If you can imagine going from the kind of urban parts of Florida that are really highly populated, a lot of traffic, a lot of tourism, a lot of industry. And we went up to North Central Texas in my teen years. And if you can imagine going from that, Florida, to a town of about 9,000 people. It was an oil and agricultural cattle town, and Graham, Texas. And it was really kind of a culture shock at first, but turned into some of the best and most formative years of my life, where I really learned the value of hard work, working out in the fields with my dad. I really got to kind of connect with nature and just take in some gorgeous sunsets in the evenings out working in the fields, enjoying the views of the wildlife while I was out working. But one thing that I did learn from hard manual labor was it made sure that I kept on track for college. And so I ended up going to Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee in 1998, right after I graduated from high school. I was homeschooled and met my sweetie there, Lori. We were married by senior year. We decided neither one of us really wanted to graduate and leave the other one behind. So we got married, started a family pretty young afterwards. Went on to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville afterwards because I thought, hey, I want to work in journalism. And it'd be great to have a master's degree in journalism to prove my commitment to the field, make people take me seriously. And it was during that time that I ran into an Army recruiter while I was working my part-time job at a law firm. I was at the courthouse one day filing paperwork. And this gentleman and I struck up a conversation in an elevator. He was there in his full dress uniform. It was very impressive to me as a civilian at the time. And so I started asking him questions about what he did and what Army life was like, just trying to be friendly, conversational. I was genuinely curious, though I was not looking for a military career. Well, as a good recruiter does, he managed to coax a phone number out of me. And 7 months later, there I am raising my right hand, swearing into the Army in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so we were in the Army for 20 years. We moved to several different parts of the nation. We've landed in northeastern Kansas, just on the outskirts of the greater Kansas City, Missouri area. And now we're kind of starting a new phase of life after the Army, enjoying being kind of planted and getting to watch our kids grow in a smaller community. And we're excited about what's next.
So what is the postdoc or the doctoral degree in that you're seeking?
So I am in a program entitled Leadership Communication. But I'm kind of a misplaced public policy scholar is what I've learned. But the faculty there have been so wonderfully gracious to me and have been very supportive of my research agenda. So I'm a career communicator. In the Army, I was a public affairs officer. So everything I did was about stuff like this. Mm-hmm. I did community engagement. I did interviews. I did social media strategy. I was part of the bridge that the military tries to build between it and the public, which is incredibly important in our form of governance. And so I love all things communication. And I also love team leadership, small organizational leadership. I had the chance to lead teams. I had the chance to lead a company while I was in the Army. So fell in love with that. So when I saw a degree program that merged both of those, they had me at hello. I was a sucker from the get-go when I saw the marketing. And so I applied and they very kindly accepted me. So I've been studying leadership communication, but my research agenda is actually more in the policy realm. My dissertation work is studying how did we come to this concept that the military is an apolitical, in air quotes, institution when it is funded by the government, when it is commanded by elected leadership, when we exert our national will on other nations with it. There are absolutely political connotations to all of that. And yet we kind of say the opposite. So I was curious. I was like, this would be something fun to explore. How did we get to where we believe this in spite of what we do? And so that's what my research agenda is all about. And I'm having a lot of fun writing.
Well, and I guess we could go right to why. Well, so why do you think the reason is that we're not apolitical, but we say we are?
Oh, all
Or
right.
are you still researching it to the point where you're not ready to answer that yet?
Well, I have some theories and what I believe are pretty educated guesses. I'm trying to make sure that I don't bore your audience going too deep in the weeds on this. It's really kind of comes out of the Second World War. When you look at the history of the United States, traditionally we are a nation. Our ancestors were part of a nation that were really cautious about the idea of having large standing military forces during peacetime because there had been this historical observance over hundreds of years, particularly in Europe, that large forces during peacetime ended up causing problems for society, and the nations that bred large armies inevitably found ways to use them that might not always be to the benefit of the populace. So we come out of the Second World War, and the nation has decided we are going to become the global military superpower. We didn't want to be caught off guard again, like we were for what Germany had done in the years after the First World War. So, and we also have a rising Russia. We need to counter that. So we decided as a nation, yeah, we will become a global, permanent, large, highly industrialized, highly institutionalized force. Well, how do you gain public support for that when the public has traditionally, for hundreds of years, been very, very suspect of that and very much against it? Well, in walks Samuel Huntington, a brilliant political scientist who writes the book, The Soldier and the State. And in it, he proposed a theory of military supervision in which officers would abstain from voting. And then over time, that grew legs into, okay, well, now we're just not involved in politics. And then in time, that grew legs into we're apolitical. But if you go around the force and ask most people what that means, if you ask them to define that word, few would actually be able to define it. It's one of those kind of discursive terms that we've come up with, kind of like for the public good. Well, what is for the public good? Can you actually define that? And it's largely often in the eyes of the beholder. So that's where I believe it came from. I'm still doing quite a bit of work and reading in that. But historically, it's very fascinating to see where we've come in just 70 years on that topic.
Yeah. And also, we're in a phase of all of that where it seems to me, at least, that it's changing and morphing again. I mean, with what's happened in the last 7 years in this country, and the lack of desire for discourse, the desire on some people's parts to really involve the military in a lot of things. It seems like we're possibly changing again, or perhaps even strengthening the military in some way, and I'm not sure what that is.
There's really kind of been somewhat of a public backlash. The last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, we saw an increasing comfort with military members publicly advocating for political policy for political parties, which is absolutely within their constitutional right to do. George
Hmm.
Washington himself said, "We did not lay aside the citizen to assume the soldier." But again, that discourse coming out of the Second World War really kind of conditions the American public to think that when you're in the military, you do give up your rights to expression, that you do give up your rights to citizen agency and meaningful involvement in civic processes. And while we do rightly give up some expressive rights, and that is captured and codified in military regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, there is some legitimacy to that argument. But I would say, if you're holding a ruler in your hand, the regulations kind of restrict us somewhere between the 2 and 3 inch mark on the ruler, whereas the perception that's just kind of come out of the repetition of these terms and ideas is more that we're up around the 9 or 10 inch mark on the ruler, if that makes any sense for you. So we've seen in the last few years more military people being and willing to get involved politically, and there has been somewhat of a backlash to it. And therein is the problem. If you're going to hold to a belief, to a doctrine, to a discursive claim, then you have to match it. And the military is really kind of at a point right now. They have a decision to make. Are we going to hold on to this discourse, to this idea? Or are we going to acknowledge that, well, the regulations are much less restrictive than what people have been led to believe? It's a tough spot to be. There's not a perfect answer. To help the institution requires cranking down on constitutional freedoms, and well, what is the institution there to serve? So it's a very sticky issue.
Well, and it does seem to me that in no way, because a person becomes a soldier, and even in their oaths, do they give up the right to be a citizen of the country. So I'm with George Washington.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm with George Washington himself. The greatest American, and I think we would. It's a good reminder of the importance of knowing our history and knowing where we came from. It's in my interviews with military members on this topic in my research, I'm finding that like me, most of them were just kind of told these things verbally. They were never pointed to the actual rules. They were never actually pointed to the actual laws. I only know the regulations because I have a personal fascination on the topic, and I went and looked them up. But no one ever told me where to find them. That was research on my own to even figure out where do I look for this. So we really need to do better nationally to know our history, know where we came from.
We do have a really interesting paradox in the world because we've gotten in the last two government administrations two different views of not only how to govern, but to a degree, how the military needs to be a part of it. And that's got to not be very helpful to things either.
Absolutely. The military, at the end of the day, is controlled by the civilian governance. Now, I'll acknowledge that General Mark Milley didn't really seem to think so, and there have been other figures in military history, who MacArthur being one of them, who seemed to challenge who was actually in charge of the military. But at the end of the day, constitutionally, we are governed by civilians, and that is right. That is proper. Anything else would be a coup, and you don't want that. So it comes down to how does the military try to hold a consistent line when you have governments that change every 2 to 4 to 8 years and have drastically different perspectives on policy? How do you as a military hold an even keel in an otherwise stormy sea? And in previous generations, we had senior general officers who were pretty good at that. They were pretty good at saying, regardless of what the ship of state is doing, the ship of military is going to remain on a heading to serve everyone. And there's been somewhat of a breakdown of discipline at these senior ranks in the last probably 10 years that's really kind of shuttered the ship of the military. And I think some of the recently promoted general officers understand that. I think General George, the new chief of staff of the Army, I think he understands that, and he's trying to do some things to reintroduce some stability, but it's a hard thing.
Yeah. And the other part about it is that the military, in some ways, is a part of society. So we've had things like the whole don't ask, don't tell, dealing with um, LGBTQ types of issues, and of course, even women in the military. And there's been a lot of things that haven't necessarily been as visible as they have become, and are issues that we are starting to face and deal with more. But it seems to me that the military, like it or not, is part of society, and we do need to recognize that collectively as well.
We're absolutely drawn from society. We serve society. We exist, for the protection of society. But I will say there's one thing that's always kind of set Western militaries apart a little bit, and the U.S. military hails from that Western tradition of understanding that just because society chooses to take a move in one direction doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the national security interest of the United States for the military to follow suit. And there is kind of a reason that the military has always tried to, in some way, set itself apart, of acknowledging that there's some things that society will do or won't do that are affected by the times. As Shakespeare himself noted, there's always a tide in the affairs of man. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, the winds shift. But one thing that always set the military apart was this idea of, at the end of the day, if it's a societal change that enables us to better defend the nation, then that's the direction we'll move. If it's a societal change that could potentially be a friction point or cause additional challenges in securing the nation, we might think on that one a little bit harder. We might be a little slower to adopt that. And we've seen that has kind of broken down. The military is very much going out of its way to be reflective of society. And in some ways that can be good. And in some ways that's caused additional unnecessary frictions to the force, and is rightly having questions asked about it.
And that's where having good, solid leadership in the military at the highest echelons has to be an important part of it, because that's where ultimately the direction that the military goes is, at least in part, going to be authored. Yes, there's a civilian government that and civilian commander in chief, but still the military leaders have to really be the ones mostly to figure out where the military should go in terms of policies and how it deals with different issues or not, I would think.
And the key word that you hit on there, Michael, is leadership. Back a few months ago, I wrote a piece that was published by Real Clear Defense called 7 New Things the New Sergeant Major of the Army Could Do to Restore Trust in the Force. And the argument that I made, his predecessor was one who was very kind of reactive to the whims, you might say, of the younger generation of soldiers. He was very much all over Twitter about, tell me your issues, let me get involved in your issues. And he was in some ways a very divisive senior official in the military. And I equated it to, you want to look at kind of the British constitutionalist position. The British crown, if you're looking overseas, has traditionally been something that it's kind of the rock, unmovable, unshakable. The Parliament will do what Parliament will do. That the Tories and Labour will do what they will do. But the crown is immovable. The crown serves all. And that's kind of something that the military reflected. And I call out to the new rising generation of military leaders to remember that we don't own this. We own nothing in the institution. We all leave it one day, as I left it a matter of weeks ago. All I have are my memories and hopes that I was able to leave some things better than I found them, and that the people that I served, that I hope I served them well. But at the end of the day, we hand it off to someone else. And it's so important to have good leaders who recognize that we steward the profession, that we want to do the best we can with it in our time, and recognize the decisions that we make will impact those who serve long after our time, and do our best to hand it off in the best possible condition that we can for them, because then to society we return, and then we depend on those who came after us for our national defense. And so it's the steward mindset to me is key.
Yeah. Well, and going back a little bit, so you were in graduate school, you got recruited and accepted and went into the military. What did you do? What was it like when you first went in? That certainly, again, had to be quite a culture shock from things that you had experienced before.
Oh, yeah.
I figured.
It absolutely was. You never forget your first shark attack at basic training. For anyone who's unfamiliar with that, it's when you once you've done your initial unprocessing there at whatever base you go to your basic training at. For me, it was Fort Jackson in South Carolina. And then they eventually bus you off to your training companies, which is where you will actually conduct your combat training. This is after you've received your uniforms and done all your finance paperwork and life insurance and all that. And the buses stop, and the drill sergeants, they are just there waiting for you. And it's a moment you never forget. And of course, you jump off the bus, and they're giving you all these commands that they know it's impossible for you to execute to any level of satisfaction. And then when you fail, as you inevitably will, the entire group just gets smoked over and over and over again. And I remember that moment, just having that realization of I am not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
Like the next few months of my life are about to be very different than anything I've ever experienced. And it absolutely was. I got through that. And I think the first thing that was really kind of shocking to me beyond the training environment was the use of last names. So, I go by Chase. My friends call me Chase. People who know me call me Chase. I'm not hung up on titles. I'm a simple guy. In the military, you are your rank and last name. I was Specialist Spears, Sergeant Spears, Lieutenant Spears, or LT, Captain Spears, Major Spears. And I remember at my first unit, there were other people who in my unit, they were the same rank as me. And so I thought we're peers. I'd call them by their first name. And they never gave me problems about it. But our higher ups would, people have rank Spears. We don't go by first names, Spears. And I never 20 years in, I still never really adjusted well to that. I learned how to keep myself from getting as many talking tos about it over the years as I had in previous times. But that was a culture shock. And just the constant, what we call in the military, the battle rhythm, civil society would call it your work schedule. Well, in the military, it never really ends. Your days start very early. You have physical training that you're doing with your unit at 6:30. Depending on what unit you're in, you may be off at a reasonable time in the late afternoon, early evening, or you may be there. I remember staying at work one night till 4 a.m. just because the boss gave us a job to do. Frankly, it was an unreasonable job, but he gave us a job to do in an extraordinarily tight deadline, and it took us till 4 a.m. to get the job done. And I was at work by 6:30 the next morning. So you never really, you do get used to that in some ways because you kind of come to accept it. But it's been really eye-opening to me in the last nearly 3 months now that I've been out, looking back and having some control over my schedule now for the first time in 20 years, and realizing, wow, it was such a foreign existence I lived. But when you're swimming in a fishbowl, you don't know you're wet. So every time you do adapt to it, but it's been neat being on the other side and realizing, can kind of breathe and start to have some say over what a schedule looks like, because I'd forgotten what that would be like.
But as you rose in the ranks and I assume took on more responsibility, did that give you any more flexibility in terms of how you operated on a day-to-day basis?
It all depended on the position. There were some jobs I had where regardless of the rank, I had flexibility. And then there were other jobs where I absolutely did not. Even as a major, there was a job that I had where the boss was very adamant. This is the time you will be here, and you will be sitting at this desk between these hours, and you are authorized is a big term in the military culture. You are authorized a 30-minute lunch break period, and you will be here until this time every day. And this was when I had, I think I was at my 17, 18-year mark. And I remember thinking to myself, golly, do I need to ask permission to go to the bathroom too? It seemed I didn't. So it really kind of depended on your job. There's a perception a lot of times that the higher you go in rank, the more control you have over your life. And I observed that the opposite is actually true. The higher you go, typically the more demands are placed on you, the more people are depending on the things that you're doing, and the bigger the jobs are and the longer the days are, was my experience. But it ebbed and flowed depending on what position I was in at the given time.
Now, when you first enlisted and all that, what was Lori's reaction to all that?
I was shocked. She was so supportive. She actually grew up in an Air Force household. And so she knew military life pretty well. Her dad had been in, he spent a lot more time in the Air Force than I did the Army. And then even after he retired from the Air Force, he went on and taught at the Naval Academy as a civilian. So she has just always had a level of familiarity with the military as long as she can remember. She joked with me that when she got married to me and then had to give up her dependent military ID card, that it was kind of a moment of mourning for her. She didn't want to give that thing up. So one day there we are in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I approach her, and I'm trying to be very careful, very diplomatic, very suave in how I bring it up to her, and let her know I've been thinking about the Army, and I'm kind of curious what she might think about that, because it'd be such a drastic lifestyle change from everything we've been talking about. And I was bracing for her to look at me and be like, are you insane? And instead she was like, oh, you want to get in the military and I get an ID card again? Yes. So she was supportive from Jump Street. And so you talk about a wife who just was there every minute of it, and loved and supported and gave grace and rolled with the punches. My Lori did. She was absolutely phenomenal. Though I will admit, when it got to the point that I was starting to think maybe 20, I'll go ahead and wrap this up, because my original plan had been to do 30. But when I started talking with her about that, she was also ready. She was ready to actually start having me home regularly for us to be able to start making family plans and be able to follow through with them. Because we had, the last 3 years, we had not been able to follow through with family plans because of the different positions that I was in. So she was very, very supportive of me joining. And then she was equally very supportive of me going ahead and calling it a day here just at the end of this year. But what a partner. I could not have done it without her.
So where did she live when you were going through basic training and all that?
So she stayed in Knoxville for a little bit. Yeah. And then from there, she actually ended up moving up to her dad's and his wife's place up in Maryland, because my follow-on school after basic training was the Defense Information School. That's where all the public affairs courses are taught. And it so happens that is located at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is just about a 45-minute drive, traffic dependent, from where her dad lived. So while I was in basic training, she went ahead and moved up there to Maryland, so that while I was in school up there, we could see each other on the weekends. And then from there, we didn't have to go back to Tennessee and pack up a house. Our stuff was already packed up, so we could get on the road together there to wherever our next duty station was. And it turned out, funny enough, to be Colorado Springs, Fort Carson. And here's why that's funny. When I approached Lori about joining the Army, one of the things that she was really excited about was seeing the world. If you're in the military, you get to see the world, right? And my first duty assignment was the town that she had grown up in, because her dad had spent the last few years of his career teaching at the Air Force Academy there on the northern end of Colorado Springs. So her dreams of seeing the world with me turned out that our first tour was going right back home for her.
Well, that has its pluses and its minuses.
Yep. So it was neat for me to get to see where she had grown up and learn the town a little bit.
I've been to Fort Meade, and actually a few times I used to sell technology to folks there. And then several years ago, I was invited to come in after the World Trade Center, do a speech there. And so it was fun spending some time around Fort Meade. Heard some wonderful stories. My favorite story still is that one day somebody from the city of Baltimore called the fort because they wanted to do traffic studies or get information to be able to do traffic studies to help justify widening roads to better help traffic going into the fort. So they called the fort and they said, "Can you give us an idea of how many people come through each day?" And the person at the other end said, "Well, I'm really not sure what you're talking about. We're just a little shack out here in the middle of nowhere." And so they ended up having to hire their own people to count cars for a week going in and out of the fort. It was kind of cute.
Well, there's quite a bit of traffic there now. That base is
Well, there was then too. There wasn't
Yeah.
just a little shack, of course. It was a whole
Yeah.
big fort.
Yeah. It's I was back there. Golly, I want to say it wasn't that long ago, but it was about 5 years ago. Now I was back there, and I almost didn't recognize the place. There's been so much new built there. But
Oh, I know.
as far as our Army assignments go, it's a pretty nice place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And as I said, I had the opportunity to speak there and spend some time dealing with folks when we sold products and so on. So got to know people there pretty well and enjoyed dealing with people there. They knew what they were doing.
Yep. It's a smart group of people on that base.
So you went through basic training and all that. And what got you into the whole idea of public relations and what you eventually went into?
Well, I had studied in college. My undergraduate degree was in television and radio broadcasting. My master's was in journalism. I'd grown up kind of in the cable news age and the age of the emergence of AM talk radio is a big tool of outreach. And I grew up thinking this is what I want to do. I love communication. I actually thought it'd be really neat to be an investigative reporter. I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, it was this big thing of, Channel 9 on your side.
Yes.
Had this investigative reporter who'd tell you the real deal about the restaurant or the automotive garage. And I always thought that would be amazing. Like, what a great public service, like helping people to avoid being ripped off. And so I wanted to be in news. I'm sure you're familiar with the Telecom Act of 1996. That caused a tremendous consolidation of media. For your audience who might not be familiar with it, it used to be that really, if you had the wherewithal to buy a media station, a television station, a radio station, you were unlimited in what you could buy. There were limits, I should say, on what you could buy, so that you couldn't control too much media environment. The Telecom Act of 1996 completely deregulated that. And so large media companies were just swallowing up the nation. And that meant there was a tremendous consolidation of jobs. And my junior year in college, I was in the Southeast US at the time at Lee University. Atlanta nearby was our biggest hiring media market. My junior year, CNN laid off 400 people. So I could tell really quick, this is going to be an even more challenging field to break into than I thought. And that's why I ended up working part-time at a law firm while I was in journalism school afterwards, because I was looking for a backup plan. I thought if journalism doesn't work out, I also love the law. It'd be neat to get some experience working in a firm to see if I want to go to law school. So it was a natural fit for me when the Army recruiter started talking to me. And he was asking what I was interested in. And I told him, well, here's what my degree is in. Here's what my career plan had been. Here's what I really want to do with my life. And he said, we have public affairs. I said, what's that? And it turns out the military has radio stations and they have television networks and they do PR. I had no idea. I was a civilian. I was like, well, that sounds good. And so I thought, yeah, sure, I will enlist for that. come in, do 1 4-year contract. I'll build a portfolio, and then I'll be able to take that portfolio out into the civilian realm, and hopefully that will make me more competitive for a job in the news market. And of course, a couple of years into that, I was in Kuwait, deployed to Camp Arif John, and my brigade commander sat me down to lunch one day and made it very clear that he expected me to apply for officer candidate school, which was nowhere on what I was interested in doing, was nowhere on my radar. I applied. I really didn't have a lot of confidence. I thought I looked at officers and I thought they were people who were way more intelligent than me, way more suave than me, and I really didn't know if I'd get in. Well, I got in, and after I commissioned, officer candidate school is about like basic training all over again, so that was fun. And I ended up being assigned to a combat camera unit, and then afterwards was able to put my paperwork in to branch transfer right back into public affairs. So it was the perfect match. It was everything I wanted to do. I didn't get to work in news directly. I wasn't a reporter, but I got to work with reporters. I got to be an institutional insider and help facilitate them and help to tell the stories of what some great American patriots were doing and wanting to serve their countries. And so it was, for the most part, more often than not, it was a really, really fun way to earn a living.
I collect as a hobby old radio shows, so I'm very familiar with. But back in the 40s was the Armed Forces Radio Service. Mm-hmm. Then it became Armed Forces Radio and Television Service, and so I'm aware a little bit of the whole broadcast structure in the military. Not a lot, but some, and know that it's there, and it does. I'm suspect a really good job of helping to keep people informed as much as they can with the things that they have to do in the world.
It's a comfort over the years, if you're spending a lot of time overseas, to have kind of that taste of home, and mm-hmm. The Armed Forces Network does a really good job of that. I think we're starting to see some debates inside the military now. What do we want to continue of it? Because now information is so ubiquitous, right, if you will. You can pull down, you can stream whatever you want, wherever you are in the globe. So I kind of wonder, in the next 10, 20 years, will it still be a thing? But during my early career, during my early deployment, before you could stream stuff, it was really cool to have an AFN radio station to tune into. It was really cool to have an AFN television network to tune into, to be able to get a taste of home. That was right. Very much a comfort.
Right. Yeah, it is something that helps. Well, you can't necessarily stream everything. I spent a week in Israel this summer, and there were broadcasts I could get and pick up through the internet and so on. And there was stuff from here in the U.S. that I couldn't get. I suspect it has to do with copyright laws and the way things were set up. But there was only so much stuff that you could actually do.
And what a time to be in Israel. I bet that trip is even more memorable for you now than it would have been otherwise.
Fortunately, it was in August, so we didn't have to put up with the things that are going on now. But still, yeah, it was very memorable. I enjoyed doing it, spending a week with Accessibility over there and getting to meet with all the folks. So it was definitely well worth it, and something that I will always cherish, having had the opportunity to do.
Good for you. It's on my bucket list. I've always wanted to spend some time over there.
Hot and humid in the summer, but that's okay.
Absolutely.
But they love breakfast.
Oh, really?
So yeah, definitely something to think about. Well, so you joined, you got the public relations jobs and so on. So how did all that work for you over, well, close to 20 years? What all did you do, and what stories can you tell us about some of that?
It was fascinating. It was fascinating because everything that I got to touch was in some way a story. And so my first job was in radio and television production. I did quite a bit of that in Kuwait. And it was actually there that I got my first taste of crisis communication, and I was immediately addicted. Do you remember back in, it was December 2004, Donna Rumsfeld said, "You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want or might wish to have at another time."
Yeah.
I was there. That was uttered in Camp Buren, Kuwait. And that was such an interesting moment for me in terms of a story to tell. I was with the 14th Public Affairs Detachment. We were deployed to Camp Arif John to provide public affairs support for Third Army's forward headquarters. This was back during the height of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so there was a lot of military going over there. We were part of that. And I remember hearing this tasking that had come down that the Secretary of Defense is going to come out here. He's going to do this town hall meeting with the troops. There's going to be no question that you can't ask. You're going to be allowed to say anything that you want to say to the Secretary of Defense. Nothing's going to be scripted. Nothing's going to be put through for review. And by the way, 14th Pad, you guys are going to make sure that it can be televised live back to the United States. And so here I am thinking, what could possibly go wrong? And so we hold the event. Secretary of Rumsfeld handled it really, really well. They set up this big, fighting machinery display there in a big aircraft hangar up at Camp Buren, which is in northern Kuwait, just not too far south from the Iraqi border. And he gets up, he gives this speech. He's well received by the troops, and then it goes to the Q&A part. And soldiers were asking him all sorts of questions. Most of them were jovial, hey, when do we get to go to Disney World? Stuff like that. They were kind of being jocular with him.
Seems a fair question.
Yeah, I felt him, right? And so finally, this one guy, I'll never forget his name, Specialist Thomas Wilson from the 278th Regimental Combat Team, Tennessee National Guard, asks him a question about when are they going to get the body armor that's needed. And in true Rumsfeld style, he says, well, I'm not quite sure I understood the question. Can you ask it again? Which is a great technique he used to buy him some time to think through the answer. And then he came back after the second question, and the whole hangar, there were about 1,000 of us in there. It was hushed.
Not bad.
You could have heard a plastic cup hit the floor at the back of the room. I mean, everyone was like, what? Oh no. What just happened? What's about to happen? And Rumsfeld makes that remark: you go to war with the army you have, not the one you want or need.
Yeah.
And then the questions went on, and after that, there was no awkward moment for the rest of the time. And I thought, wow, that could have gone south, but it didn't. Cool. It was neat to watch. I was running the television camera that caught the moment. I was in the room. And so me and my sergeant had to stay up there the rest of the day because there were some other television network interviews with other officials that we were running the satellite transponder for. And it was a long day. Our commander was kind of being a jerk to us. So by the end of the day, we were tired. We'd been up there sleeping on cots for a couple of days. We were kind of just ready to get back down to Camp Arif John to our beds and put that whole mission behind us. And then we drive 2-3 hours through this pouring rainstorm in Kuwait in a canvas side Humvee that's leaking water's just pouring into this thing on us. So we're done. We're like, we just want to go to bed. We get back to our base. We're offloading all the equipment, putting everything away. And at this point in time, I'd forgotten about the moment earlier in the day when that question was asked. And I walk in, and there we had this wall of televisions, tracking all the different news networks back in the US. And on all of them, there's Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want or wish to have at another time. And at that moment, I was like, it's about to be an interesting few weeks around here. And it turned out indeed to be an interesting few weeks, an interesting few months. And I got to be on the front end of what the public affairs response to that looked like. And I can tell you, I've never seen armored vehicles flow into a place as quickly as they did in the following month. So the power of a message transmitted is a real thing.
Well, so whatever happened to Specialist Wilson?
I don't know. I know that news coverage with that news reporters were asking that very question, and coverage that I saw said, oh, his unit has assured that nothing bad will happen to him. And he was a National Guardsman, so he kind of fell under a different command structure than us. Uh, from time to time, I have wondered that, and I've tried to look him up online and just try to find out what happened to this guy and what was life like for him. I'd love to talk to him and ask, all right, what was it like, man? What did your unit do? But I have no idea. I can't find him. I presume he's gone about his life and doesn't want to be famous about it. But it also goes back to National Guard culture versus active duty culture. We talked earlier about the citizenship aspect, and the National Guard gets that way more than the active component. At the end of the day, they demobilize and they go home. And
Right.
you're running into the same people you serve with at church, at the grocery store, at the PTA, places like that. Some of them might be your neighbors. And so they have an entirely different outlook. This is what they do to serve the country when needed. And then they go on about their lives. I don't think you would have seen an active duty soldier ask that question. I really don't, because the culture is so markedly different. And there's a level of kind of freedom of thought and expression present in the Guard that is much more lacking in the active component.
Should there be more freedom in that sense in the active component, or do you think that it's really appropriate for there to be the dichotomy that you're describing?
In the active force, you need discipline. You need a disciplined force who, when they're given a lawful order, will carry it out hastily because lives could hang in the balance. That's absolutely important, and we can never lose that. But sometimes we confuse discipline. I say sometimes, often more is the more appropriate term. Often we confuse discipline with silence. We confuse discipline with a lack of willingness to ask tough questions. We confuse discipline with just saying yes, sir, when you know in the back of your mind there might be something you need to dig into more. We need, unfortunately, since the end of the Second World War, going back to my comments earlier about this large industrialized, institutionalized force we have, it breeds careerists. It breeds a mindset that's fearful to ask tough questions, even if you know they need to be asked, because you want to be promoted, right? You want the good assignments, right? And it breeds a culture where you really are much more timid, or you're much more likely to be timid than someone who's maybe a reservist or a National Guard member.
Right.
We need people who will ask tough questions. We don't need indiscipline. We don't need showmanship. We don't need people who are being performative just to be seen. But there are valid questions to be asked. Is U.S. defense policy better set for a 400 ship Navy or a 300 ship Navy? That's a valid question. Is it better for us to use this route of attack versus that route of attack, given everything we know? Those are valid questions. We need people in the military who are willing to be critical thinkers. And there are a lot of extraordinarily brilliant people in today's armed forces, as there always has been. But there is, in the active duty side, a culture that works against original thought, and that's really to our detriment. And I think the manner in which the evacuation of Afghanistan ended is just one more blatant indicator of that.
Yeah, it was not handled nearly as well as it could have been, as we have seen history tell us and teach us.
No, absolutely. It broke my heart. I'm a veteran of that conflict. I'm not one who cries easily, Michael, but I can tell you that morning when I saw some of the images coming out of Kabul, especially there's this video of a C-17 cargo jet taking off and people literally hanging to it and falling to their deaths. I fell off out of my run and into a sobbing human being on the ground for a little bit. It was a lot to process, and it has continued to be a lot to process. And there is a great example of why you got to be willing to ask tough questions. There was no reason at all we should have abandoned Bagram and tried to evacuate out of downtown Kabul, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Well, speaking of you, I understand that you weren't a great fan of jumping out of airplanes, but you got used to doing that.
I sure did. Oh yeah. I always thought that would just be something that I don't want to say no sane person would do. I mean, I enjoy watching skydivers. I think it's really cool. And obviously they're sane. I never thought I would be among them. I thought, nah, that's just something. I don't think I'm going to do that. And when I was in officer candidate school, I was roommates with a guy who had been to airborne school earlier in his career. And he was like, man, don't do it. Don't ever let him talk you into going to airborne school. You'll be stuck at Fort Bragg. You'll be broke all the time. You'll be hurting all the time. The Army takes the fun out of everything. And he's right to an extent. The Army does take the fun out of most things it touches. But I got to my first unit as an officer. So I'd done enlisted time for 3 years. Then I went to officer candidate school. And then my first job as an officer was at the 55th Combat Camera Company, which is not a full airborne unit, but it's a partial airborne unit. And they had a hard time keeping enough active duty paratroopers on hand. And so I remember day one when I was in processing the unit, there are all these different places you go when you in process. You got to go see the training room, and you got to go see the administrative room, and you got to go see the transportation office, and all these places, and they're just checking your paperwork. And so I see the training room, and there's the sergeant in there, and he's looking through my list, and he's asking me all these questions. When was your last PT test? When was your last physical? Making notes on me for the unit record. And then he says, do you want to go to airborne school? And without thinking, I said, absolutely not. I have no interest in going to airborne school. And his reply to me was, go ahead and get an airborne physical. And I thought there's no way I'm ever getting an airborne physical because I'm not going to airborne school. So a few weeks later, I'm in the unit, I'm more comfortable, and I'm in a different office across the hall from where this guy worked. And I'm joking around with this other sergeant. And I'm like, Sergeant, you're just such a cool guy. Like, you've got it all together. You're like everything I want to be when I grow up. How do you do it? And he said, well, sir, you got to go to airborne school. That's step one. The other guy across the hall overhears that, mouse ears. I don't know how, but he darts out of his office across the hall into this office that we were in, looks me straight in the face and said, did you say you want to go to airborne school? I'm like, no, that is not what I said. I absolutely have no interest. I'm not going to airborne school. And he again replies with, schedule your physical. And I thought, I'm not going, so there's no point in me scheduling a physical. So I get back to my office later that day, and I thought, this guy is not going to give up. So I came up with this brilliant plan. It was the smartest plan you will ever hear of. I'm going to pretend I'm going to get my airborne physical, and then he'll forget about me and leave me alone. So I called him and said, hey, Sergeant, what's the phone number I have to call to schedule an airborne physical? And he gives me the phone number and the name of the person to talk to. And I said, great, I'll talk to him. There were 2 or 3 other lieutenants set to show up to the unit in the next month. So I thought, he will assume I'm getting a physical, which I'm not getting. And those other guys will show up, and he will convince them to go, and I will fall off his radar. I was incorrect. That was a bad miscalculation on my part. You might say a flawed operation.
And you're the one who was talking about brilliant people in the Army. Anyway, go ahead.
I know, right? Yeah. I am a paradox. And so that within an hour, I get an email from him with he's already put me in for school. I already have orders generated to go to jump school. And then he calls me. He's like, hey, by the way, you report in like 3 weeks. I need your physical as soon as you can get it. And I thought, this guy, I told him I'm not going to airborne school. Well, at the same time, our unit commander was a paratrooper, and he loved jumping out of airplanes. And I had 2 or 3 paratroopers in my platoon who were underneath me. And I thought, there's no way I can't go now, because if I get the commander to release me, one, I'll lose face with the old man, and I'll lose face with the troops that I lead, because the soldiers have to compete for this. They're just giving it to me. And so I went protesting, kicking, screaming the whole way. I hated ground week. I hated tower week. And then they took me up to the 250-foot tower and dropped me off the side of it under a parachute. And I loved it. I was like, oh, this was fun. I actually asked if I could do it again, and they said, no, you only get one try. So the next week we go into jump week, and there I am in the back of an airplane, and it comes my turn to get up and exit it, and I do, and I get to the ground and I survive, and I literally just sat there and laughed uncontrollably because I couldn't believe I just jumped out of a plane, and it was my first of 40 jumps. I was absolutely hooked from that moment on.
And what did Lori think of that?
She was a little bit surprised. She again was supportive, but she was surprised. She never thought it's something that I would take to, and it ended up being a great thing for us because having been on jump status, it opened the door for me to request the unit in Alaska that we ended up going to for 6 years. You had to be on airborne status to be able to go to that job. And so, had I not gone to jump school, I would not have qualified to go into Alaska for that particular job. And so, it ended up being a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I would have never guessed it. It's another one of those poignant reminders to me that every time that I think I've got a plan, it's God's way of reminding me that He has a sense of humor because what's going to work out is always going to be very different from what I think.
And you helped Lori see the world. So it worked out.
Absolutely. Yeah. We never got to spend time together overseas, but Alaska was an amazing adventure. And gosh, if any of your listeners haven't been there, you got to go see it someday.
Yeah. I went there on a cruise, so I didn't see as much of it as I would have loved to, but still I got to see some of it. It was great.
There's nothing like it.
No. Now you, as you advanced in the ranks and so on, you started being in public relations, being a communicator and so on. But clearly, as you advanced, you became more, and I'm sure were viewed as more of a leader. That was kind of a transition from not being a leader and just being a communicator and kind of doing what you were told to being more of a leader. What was that transition like?
That was another one of those things that I would have never seen coming. After I did my 3 years as the spokesman for the Airborne Brigade in Alaska, I ended up becoming the deputy communication director for U.S. Army Alaska, which was the highest Army command there in the state, responsible for 11,000 troops and their families in multiple locations. And I remember one day my boss came to me and saying, hey, the general is going to give a speech to the hockey team at the University of Alaska about leadership. And so I need you to write it. And I looked at him and I said, boss, I'll write whatever you tell me to write. But the general has forgotten more about leadership than I know. Like, where do I start with this? And I don't remember the exact words. I think it was something to the effect of, you're smart, you'll figure it out. And so I put together a speech. It was by no means anything glorious, but it was the best I had to give at that moment in time and what leadership was, fully convinced that I was not one. And then over time, there were people who spoke into me at that headquarters who called out leadership that I didn't see. They were pointing out influence that I had. They were pointing out people who I was able to help steer towards decisions that I didn't realize, that I didn't know. And it made me start looking back at other parts of my career and realizing, oh my goodness, I actually led that team. Those men actually looked to me for decisions. I am a leader. I had no idea. It was something I always thought, if you were in the military and you were a leader, you were some grand master, like Patton or Eisenhower. And I didn't think myself anything like that. And so finally in 2015, I was offered the chance to take command of a company, which in civilian terms, that's kind of like being the executive director, if you will, of an organization of 300 people. And I was so excited for it because by that point in time, I'd finally made the mental transition of saying, I'm not merely a communicator. Communicating is what I've done vocationally. It's how I've earned a living. It's what I'm passionate about. But I came to realize I love that so much because communicating is a part of leading, and I am a leader. It's just something, looking back over the course of my life, it had always been there. I just never knew it. I never saw it. I never believed in it. And so by the time I was offered the chance to command, I was very excited for it. I was very eager for it because I realized this is going to be and a wonderful adventure getting to lead a team at this level of this size. And it was the hardest job I ever did in the Army, and it's the most rewarding. Uh, I don't know if you've ever watched any of the Lord of the Rings movies,
Mm-hmm.
but there's this moment where Aragorn is being chided. Set aside the ranger, be who you were meant to be the king, and that came back to my mind several times. To challenge myself that just because I've only seen myself as a communicator all these years doesn't mean that I can't do other things. And so it was a joy to actually walk into that. But leading is not easy. There are a lot of hard days. There were a lot of hard decisions, uh, especially when I was a commander. I agonized over decisions that I made because I knew this will have an impact on a person. This will have an impact on a family. This will change the directions and plans that people had. And so it's a heavy weight to bear. And I think it's good that those kind of decisions come with weight. And I would question someone who can make those kind of calls without having to wrestle with them.
When you look at all the things that you've done and the work that you do and the work that you did, at the end of every day or sometime during the day, I know you were pretty busy, but did you ever have the time to just kind of sit back and reflect on how did this go today? How did that go? What could have been better? Did you do any kind of introspection, or did you feel you had time to do that?
I didn't really feel I had time. And it would be easy for me to blame the unit. It'd be easy for me to blame people, but that responsibility rests with me. It's a discipline that I didn't develop until way too late in my career. And I eventually did develop it. I eventually came to realize the importance of reflection, of introspection, of taking a mental inventory of what I've accomplished, what I didn't accomplish, and what I can learn from it. But it was sadly something that I didn't do as much as I should have, and I didn't do it as early. I was really, really bad at assuming, well, because the unit needs this right now, I can't take care of this thing that I need to take care of that will allow me to be the leader that I need to be. I get in a car, someone slams into my car, and I need to get them to take care of it. Well, I don't have time. The unit's has to have me. We got to move on. Well, I've got 6 screws in my left hand in my left shoulder right now because I was always too busy to listen to the physical therapist and take care of myself. The unit needs me. The unit needs me. The men need me. And so it was a hard learned lesson, the importance of sitting back and reflecting. And it's something I wish I would have learned much sooner. But once I did, it served me well. And it's a discipline that I still practice now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think, a very important thing. And a lot of things can stem from that. What's the best position, your favorite position in the Army, and why?
The best thing I ever got to do was company command, and it's hard to say that because it's really closely tied with being a brigade director of communication, and that's a thankless, hard job. But I had the best team for the brigade communication job. But the reason I'd say company command edges that out, and it just slightly edges it out, is the people. When you're in command, you have the chance to serve well. There's no other job in the Army where your entire existence is to serve people. Now, part of that means driving them, challenging them, disciplining them when necessary. But there's always a chance to serve. There's always someone who's going to need your counsel, who's going to need the authority that only you can wield because you're the commander. And I took it as a matter of personal pride when people would come and be like, sir, I need to talk to you. I've got an issue. And a lot of times it wasn't anything official that I could help them with. They just needed an ear. And they associated that position, whoever's in the commander seat, is someone who they give credence to. They assume that's someone who can help me with an issue. So I will go to them with this issue, regardless of whether there's anything formally or not that can or can't be done. And so that was without a doubt my best job. My senior rater in that job was the deputy commander of sustainment for U.S. Army Alaska, a wonderful man named Sean Reed. And he was a brigade commander equivalent. And he had commanded a full brigade before that. So this was his third high-level command. But he often told me I'd give up the rank right now if I could be a battalion commander, because there's just nothing like commanding at that level and having soldiers who are there and need your help, and you can serve them well. And I so came to identify with that. And when I left the job, I was going on to a fellowship at Georgetown University, and I was sure that at some point in my career I would command again. I was already lining it up in my mind. I had no idea that that was kind of going to be the beginning of the transition period for us. But it's something I've always treasured, and I always will.
So you've been a student for a while, and are you a professional student?
No, no.
Just asking.
I spit at such wording. My father-in-law, himself a PhD, once teased me. He said, "Chase, you seem an awful lot like a professional student," because really, for all intents and purposes, I have been in graduate school for 7 consecutive years now, between my fellowship at Georgetown University, my time at the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College, and now this doctoral program at Kansas State University. And I didn't plan it that way. So I always push back. I'm like, no, I'm not a professional student. I held a job through every bit of that, and I had life, and I supported a family. School was my hobby. So I joke with people that I have a problem. I have a problem with school, and I have a problem with books. Some people buy boats. I buy books. Some people ski on the weekends. I study. I have a problem, but, I am very, very much looking forward to being done. Lord willing, I will defend my dissertation in late March, and go to commencement in May. And while I love learning, and I will always be a learner, I do not expect to be rushing into another formal program, at least for quite some time. I'm ready to enjoy my personal time again.
Well, we should never stop learning, although it doesn't necessarily need to be, as you're pointing out, in a formal sense like that. Well, I want to thank you for taking all this time to be with us and giving us a lot of insights and a lot of wisdom, and talking to us about some subjects that we don't necessarily talk about a lot, but it's fun to learn about. And I really appreciate all the time you've taken. If people want to reach out to you and talk with you in any way, how do they do that?
Yeah, so they feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at Chase M. Spears. I'm on LinkedIn at n/Chase-Spears. So those are the 2 channels I'm the most active on. So feel free to reach out to me there and link up. And I love engaging with people and doing what I can to help.
Well, super. And I really can tell you are a great storyteller. You do love to engage, and I value that, and really value the time that we've been able to spend with doing that today. So thanks very much for doing it. And I want to thank you for listening. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I hope that Chase is giving you some interesting things to think about, and you will follow through and learn a lot more from him, or whatever. I'd love to hear from you as well. Of course, we'd like a 5-star rating from you, if you would please do so wherever you're listening to us on Unstoppable Mindset. We do appreciate your 5-star ratings and your comments. Please pass them along. I want to thank you for being here. You can reach me, Michael Hinkson, at Michael, MICHAELHI, at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our website, our podcast website, www.michaelhinkson.com/podcast, and it's MICHAELHINGSON. So either way, we'd love to hear from you, and we really appreciate you spending the time with us. And if you have any ideas of anyone else who might be able to be a good guest for us, we'd love to hear from you. And same for you, Chase. If you know anybody else who ought to be a guest, we'd love you to pass names along. We're always looking for people who have great stories and insights to bring us. So I want to thank you all again. And Chase, you one last time, thank you very much for being here with us.
It's been a joy. I appreciate you letting me tell my story.